What would you do if the person you trusted to build a new life with left you to die in the middle of a blizzard? In the unforgiving wilderness of the American West, a storm can be a death sentence. But sometimes, it can also be a beginning. Imagine a cabin, miles from anywhere, a single point of light against a world of white. Inside, a lonely man, hardened by the wild, thinks he's heard a ghost. But the sound comes again, weaker this time. He opens the door, and what he finds on his threshold will change his life and hers, forever. Before we find out who this mysterious woman is and how she ended up in a blizzard miles from civilization, take a moment to support the channel. If you love stories of survival and unexpected connection, hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell so you don't miss what happens next. And let us know in the comments where in the world you're watching from tonight. Now, back to the storm. The wind howled like a wounded beast. It was a December night in the Wyoming Territory, 1888, and the storm was relentless, driving sheets of snow against the weathered logs of Liam O'Connell's cabin. Inside, the 34-year-old homesteader sat close to his stone fireplace, the flickering light dancing across his rugged features. He was a man made of the same tough timber as his home, solitary and self-sufficient. The storm had ambushed him, forcing him to wrestle his small herd of cattle into the barn just before the sky turned white. He was mending a broken bridle, his calloused fingers working the leather with practiced ease when he heard it. 3 weak raps against his door, a sound so out of place in the tempest it felt like a trick of the mind. Liam froze. No one with good intentions would be out in this blizzard. His nearest neighbor was miles away, and even he wouldn't dare face this weather. Cautiously, he grabbed the Winchester rifle propped against the wall. The knocking came again, fainter this time. "Who's there?" He called out, his voice rough from disuse. Silence, just the scream of the wind. Against his better judgment, Liam lifted the heavy wooden bar and cracked open the door. A blast of ice and snow tore into the cabin, but what he saw made him forget the cold completely. A woman was swaying on his threshold, barely upright. Ice crystals clung to her dark hair, which had tumbled from its pins and hung in frozen strands around a face pale as porcelain. Her traveling dress, once a deep blue wool, was soaked through and stiff with frost. In her hand, she clutched a small bag, her fingers so white they seemed carved from ice. "Please," she whispered, her lips barely moving. "Please, help me!" Without a second thought, Liam dropped his rifle and lunged forward, catching her as she collapsed. She weighed almost nothing, like a bird made of ice and cloth. He pulled her inside, kicking the door shut against the storm's fury. "Lord Almighty," he muttered, half carrying, half dragging her toward the fire. He laid her on the rag rug before the hearth, her skin as cold as a river stone. He quickly added more wood to the flames, coaxing them to life. The woman's eyes fluttered open. They were green, he noticed, green as new spring grass before they closed again. Her whole body was racked with violent shivers. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" He knelt beside her, a sudden wave of helplessness washing over him. He knew how to tend to sick cattle and injured horses, but he'd never had to care for a half-frozen woman. She managed a weak nod, her teeth chattering so hard he feared they might break. "We need to get you warm," Liam said, his voice firm to hide his uncertainty. He grabbed every blanket he owned from his narrow bed in the corner, then hesitated. Her dress was a cage of ice. She'd never warm up in those wet clothes. "Ma'am," he began, clearing his throat. "Your dress? It's got to come off, or you'll catch your death." Her eyes flew open, a flicker of alarm in their green depths. "I'll turn my back," he said quickly, his own face growing warm. "Wrap yourself in these blankets. There's a shirt of mine there, too. It's clean. I promise. I won't look." For a long moment he thought she might refuse. Then she gave the slightest nod. Liam turned to face the wall, studying the rough-hewn logs with intense focus, listening to the rustle of wet fabric and chattering teeth behind him. I'm decent," a weak voice said after what felt like an eternity. He turned to find her huddled in his blankets, the collar of his large flannel shirt visible. Her dress lay in a sodden heap beside her. Color was already returning to her cheeks. Liam busied himself making strong, black coffee and ladling out a bowl of the stew that had been simmering on the stove. He offered her the tin cup of coffee first. Her hands shook so badly he had to steady it as she brought it to her lips. She sighed as the warmth spread through her. "Thank you," she whispered. I was sure I would die out there. What in blazes were you doing out in this storm?" The question came out harsher than he intended. Fresh tears welled in her eyes. I had nowhere else to go. Liam handed her the stew and a spoon, settling on the floor at a respectful distance. Eat first, he said gently. Then, if you're willing, you can tell me what happened. As she ate, he noticed her hands, soft, uncalloused, city hands. A simple gold band glinted on her left finger. When she'd finished, she pulled the blankets tighter. My name is Eleanor, she said. Eleanor Vance, she paused. I came from Boston. I was a mail-order bride. The words seemed to cause her physical pain. I answered an advertisement from a rancher named Silas Blackwood. She let out a bitter little laugh. It doesn't matter what he promised. Liam knew the name. Silas Blackwood owned one of the largest spreads in the territory, a man known for his wealth and his cruelty. I arrived in Stone Creek this morning, Eleanor continued, her voice trembling. Mr. Blackwood met me at the station. He took one look at me and he said I wasn't what he expected. Too thin, too weak, too Eastern. Her voice broke. He brought me as far as the fork in the road, then told me to find my own way back to town. In this storm. Liam's hands clenched into fists. It wasn't snowing hard then, just starting. He said I could make it if I hurried. Then he left me there with my bag and rode off. She looked up at him, the pain in her eyes making his chest tighten. I tried to walk back, but the snow came so fast. I couldn't see the road. Then I saw your light. You did right, Liam said, his voice a low growl. Any man who'd leave a woman in weather like this ain't worth spit. Eleanor fumbled with something, pulling out a crumpled envelope. He left this too. Said it explained everything. Liam took the letter. The words were cold, businesslike. Silas Blackwood hereby dissolved any understanding with Miss Eleanor Vance, citing misrepresentation and unsuitability for ranch life. $10 was enclosed for her return passage. $10, Eleanor said with that same bitter laugh. As if I could buy my dignity back for $10. Liam crumpled the letter and tossed it into the fire. They watched it burn. You can stay here tonight, he said finally. Storm should be over by morning. Then I'll take you to town myself. I have no money for lodging, she whispered. That $10 is all I have. We'll figure something out, Liam said, suddenly aware of how small his cabin felt with 2 people in it. You take the bed. I'll sleep here by the fire. I couldn't. You can and you will, he said firmly. As he helped her to her feet, their eyes met properly for the first time. Despite the cold, the abandonment, the fear, he saw an incredible strength there. This wasn't some fragile flower. She had walked through a blizzard when most would have given up. Thank you, Mr. O'Connell, she said softly. I won't forget your kindness. Just being neighborly, he mumbled, turning away from the gratitude in her gaze. Later, as he lay on the floor listening to the storm rage and her quiet breathing from his bed, Liam couldn't shake the image of Silas Blackwood, a man who ordered a bride like cattle, then discarded her when she didn't meet his specifications. The injustice of it burned in his gut. He didn't know it yet, but as the wind howled and the fire crackled, Liam O'Connell knew this storm had blown something into his life that would change it forever. The morning light was pale and thin, filtering through frost-covered windows. Liam woke stiff and sore from his night on the hard floorboards. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world buried in silence and snow. Eleanor was already awake, sitting at his rough-hewn table wrapped in a blanket. Her own dress, now dry but hopelessly wrinkled, was on. Her dark hair was pinned up neatly, though a few stray strands framed her face, making her look younger, more vulnerable. Morning, Liam said, stretching the kinks from his spine. Coffee's still warm. I've already had 3 cups, she replied with a weak smile. I hope you don't mind. I couldn't seem to get warm enough. Help yourself to whatever you need, he said, moving to the stove. As he coaxed the fire back to life, Eleanor spoke, her voice quiet but firm. Mr. O'Connell, I need to tell you the real reason I came west. The full story. Liam poured himself a cup of coffee and sat across from her, waiting. In the clear morning light, he could see the faint lines of worry around her eyes and the determined set of her jaw. She held herself with a careful dignity that defied her circumstances. I wasn't entirely honest last night, she began. Everything I told you was true, but it wasn't the whole truth. I'm not some romantic fool who answered an advertisement on a whim. I had no other choice. Most folks who come west are running from something, Liam said gently. Eleanor nodded. My father owned a small shipping company in Boston. When he died 2 years ago, I discovered he'd been borrowing heavily to keep it afloat. The creditors took everything, our house, the business, even my mother's jewelry. Her voice grew quieter. My mother passed away shortly after. The doctor said it was pneumonia, but I think she died of a broken heart. Liam remained silent, letting her tell the story at her own pace. I tried to find work, but respectable positions for women are scarce. My landlady showed me Mr. Blackwood's advertisement. She said mail-order brides could make good lives out here. She gave a small, sad laugh. I should have known when his letters seemed too good to be true. What did he promise you? Liam asked, his anger at Blackwood simmering again. A home, respectability, a family eventually. She met his eyes, her own gaze clear and unflinching. I wasn't looking for love, Mr. O'Connell. I'm 26 years old. I just wanted somewhere to belong again. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small bundle of letters tied with a string. I kept them all. Proof of our agreement. She selected one and passed it to him. Liam read it aloud, his voice low. My dear Miss Vance, your latest letter filled me with great anticipation. The ranch house awaits your feminine touch, and I have already begun preparations for our wedding. You will want for nothing as my wife. Yours in earnest expectation, Silas Blackwood. He painted such a picture, Eleanor said softly. A big house with real glass windows, a flower garden. I practiced cooking hearty meals. I learned to mend heavy fabrics. I sold the last of my things to buy this dress, thinking it would be sturdy enough for ranch life. It is, Liam said gruffly. Blackwood's the fool. When he met me at the station, Eleanor's voice wavered. He looked me up and down like I was livestock at an auction. Said I was too skinny, that I'd never survive a Wyoming winter. Said my hands were too soft for real work. Then he laughed and said he'd ordered a wife, not a parlor ornament. Liam's fists clenched under the table. He threw my bag in the mud and left me there. He didn't even look back. That son of a... Liam bit off the curse. Pardon my language, ma'am. I've heard worse, she said with the ghost of a smile. Then I saw your light. They sat in silence for a long moment, the only sound the crackle of wood in the stove. What will you do now? Liam asked. I don't know, she confessed, looking down at her hands. I can't go back to Boston. There's nothing for me there. I have $10 and the clothes on my back. You could find work in town, Liam suggested. Mrs. Patterson at the boarding house might need help. Mr. O'Connell, Eleanor interrupted gently. I appreciate your optimism, but we both know what kind of work is available for desperate women in frontier towns. I may be naive about some things, but not about that. He felt a flush of shame. She was right. Respectable jobs were few and far between. He stood abruptly, pacing to the window. The world outside was a sea of white, beautiful and unforgiving. His own struggles seemed small compared to hers. He had this land, this cabin, a purpose. She had nothing. Did Blackwood give any other reason for changing his mind? He asked suddenly. Just what he said, that I wasn't what he ordered. Did you send a photograph? No, he said he trusted my description. Her eyes widened. You think he had another reason? Liam turned from the window. I know Silas Blackwood. He's got a mean streak a mile wide, but he's also a practical man. He wouldn't throw away a bride he'd paid passage for just because she's slender. It doesn't make sense. He chose his words carefully. Blackwood's been trying to buy up land all through this valley. Maybe having a wife would complicate things. Or maybe... He hesitated. Maybe what? Maybe someone made him a better offer. A rancher's daughter with land of her own, perhaps. Eleanor stared at the letters on the table. So I was just an inconvenience. That'd be my guess. The realization seemed to settle over her, a weight heavier than any blizzard. She slowly gathered the letters, retying them with trembling fingers. It doesn't matter why. The result is the same. I'm stranded in Wyoming with nothing and no one. That's not entirely true, Liam said before he could stop himself. She looked up, startled. What do you mean? He rubbed the back of his neck, feeling like he was walking onto thin ice. I mean, you're not alone right this moment. And Stone Creek, it's not such a bad place. Folks might surprise you, like you did, she asked softly, taking in a stranger in a storm. Just being neighborly, he mumbled again, but the words felt different now, heavier. The storm continued to rage outside, trapping them together. For 3 more days, the cabin became their entire world. A world that for Liam was starting to feel less empty. And for Eleanor was starting to feel surprisingly like a sanctuary. The storm raged on, trapping them in the cabin like castaways on a small wooden island in a sea of white. The initial awkwardness between them slowly melted away, replaced by a quiet, comfortable rhythm. Eleanor insisted on earning her keep. She was a quick learner and surprisingly resourceful. She learned to cook on his cast-iron stove, turning his simple supplies of flour, bacon, and beans into savory meals that filled the cabin with warmth. She mended his work shirts with stitches so fine they were nearly invisible. Liam, in turn, found himself talking more than he had in years. He told her about the land, about the challenges of building a life from scratch. She learned he'd taught himself to read from his mother's Bible and a stack of old almanacs. He learned she could speak a little French and knew more about geography than any teacher he'd ever met. One evening, as she was mending a tear in his coat by lamplight, she asked, "Why did you stay out here alone, Liam? Most men would have a family by now." He poked at the fire, the question stirring up old memories. "Tried courting once," he admitted. "A woman from town. She came out to see the place, took one look, and said she'd rather die an old maid than live in a shack." "This isn't a shack," Eleanor said, her voice filled with a surprising indignation. "It's well built and clean. You've made it a home. Simple, yes, but it's warm and safe." The woman was a fool. Liam felt a warmth spread through his chest that had nothing to do with the fire. Her defense of his life, of the home he'd poured his sweat and soul into, meant more to him than she could ever know. It was in that moment he realized she saw past the rough logs and the simple furniture. She saw the care, the work, the heart of the place. She saw him. "And what did you want?" she asked softly, her green eyes searching his across the small space. He met her gaze. Someone who could see past the rough edges. Someone who understood that life out here is hard, but it's worthwhile. Someone real. Someone real, she repeated, almost a whisper. The forced intimacy of the cabin began to work its magic. They were no longer just a rescuer and a victim. They were two people sharing a life, however temporary. He found himself looking forward to coming inside from the biting cold of the barn, not just for the warmth of the fire, but for the warmth of her presence. She had a quick wit and wasn't afraid to tease him. He, in turn, made her laugh with stories of stubborn cattle and his own clumsy attempts at baking. The lonely silence of his cabin was replaced by conversation and shared laughter. On the fourth morning, Liam woke to an unfamiliar silence. The wind had finally died. Weak sunlight streamed through the windows, painting the snow-covered valley in shades of pink and gold. He found Eleanor standing at the window, watching the sunrise. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "I've never seen anything like it." Liam moved to stand beside her, careful to keep a respectful distance. "Wait until spring," he said. "The whole valley turns green, and the wildflowers bloom so thick you can smell them a mile off." "I wish I could see that," she said wistfully, then caught herself. "But of course I'll be long gone by then, once the roads are clear." "Right," Liam said, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. "Town." They stood in silence, the world outside waking up under its blanket of white. He was acutely aware of her standing so close, the way the morning light caught in her dark hair, the small sigh that escaped her lips. "I should make breakfast," she said finally, turning from the window. She moved too quickly, bumping into him in the small space. He caught her arms to steady her, and suddenly they were standing far too close. Her hands were pressed against his chest, his fingers gentle on her elbows. "Eleanor," he said, her name slipping out unbidden. She looked up at him, her eyes wide, and for a heartbeat the world stopped. Then she stepped back, a blush rising in her cheeks. "I'm sorry." "No need for apologies," Liam said quickly, his own face burning. Close quarters, but something had shifted. The easy companionship of the past few days was now charged with a new awareness. He found himself watching the curve of her neck as she bent over her sewing, the way she bit her lip when she was concentrating. She, too, seemed affected, her hands sometimes trembling when they accidentally touched while passing dishes. That evening, the charged silence was broken only by the crackling fire. He knew that as soon as the snow was passable, he had to take her to town. It was the right thing to do. She deserved a real life, choices, a future. But the thought of his cabin returning to its empty silence was a cold, hard knot in his stomach. He'd known this woman less than a week, and yet the idea of her leaving felt like losing a part of himself he hadn't even known was missing. He was a man who had built his life on solitude, and he was terrified to realize he didn't want to be alone anymore. 2 days later, the sound of approaching horses shattered the morning quiet. Liam looked up from splitting firewood to see 3 riders making their way through the snow. He recognized Silas Blackwood's massive frame immediately, flanked by the town sheriff and one of Blackwood's ranch hands. "Eleanor," Liam called, setting down his axe. "Stay inside." She appeared at the doorway, her face draining of color as she recognized the lead rider. "It's him. I'll handle this," Liam said, moving to stand between her and the approaching men, his hand resting casually near the pistol at his hip. Blackwood reined in his horse a few yards from the cabin, his heavy features set in a scowl. The sheriff, a fair-minded man Liam respected, looked deeply uncomfortable. "O'Connell," Blackwood said, his voice dripping with arrogance. "I hear you've got my property." "Don't see any property of yours here," Liam replied, his voice dangerously even. "The woman. My bride. She's mine by rights. I paid her passage." Eleanor stepped out onto the porch, ignoring Liam's warning, her chin held high. "I am no man's property, Mr. Blackwood. You made that quite clear when you abandoned me in a blizzard." Blackwood's face darkened. "Now see here, girl. We had an agreement, legal and binding." "You dissolved that agreement," Eleanor interrupted, her voice steady despite her trembling hands. "In writing. Or have you forgotten the letter you left me with?" "That was a misunderstanding," Blackwood blustered. Heat of the moment. "I've reconsidered." Liam let out a short, harsh laugh. "Reconsidered? After leaving her to freeze to death?" The sheriff shifted in his saddle. "Silas says Miss Vance is his legal bride, Liam. Says you two need to sort this out proper." "There's nothing to sort out," Eleanor said firmly. "Mr. Blackwood rejected me, abandoned me, and severed our agreement. I owe him nothing. You owe me the price of your passage." Blackwood snarled. $300. You'll work it off, one way or another." The threat in his voice made Liam step forward. "That's enough, Blackwood. The lady said she's not going with you. That's the end of it. This ain't your business, O'Connell. Stand aside. I'm making it my business." The 2 men stared each other down, the tension crackling between them. The sheriff dismounted, holding his hands up peacefully. "Let's discuss this civilized-like." "Miss Vance, do you have this letter Silas mentioned?" Eleanor disappeared inside, returning with the crumpled paper. The sheriff read it, his eyebrows rising. "Seems pretty clear, Silas," he said slowly. "Says right here you're dissolving the agreement. Even gave her money for return passage. I was hasty," Blackwood growled. "A man can change his mind?" "Not after abandoning a woman in a blizzard," the sheriff replied sharply. "That's attempted murder in some folks' books. I told her the way to town." "In a storm with night coming on," Liam interjected. 5 miles through unfamiliar country. She'd have died if she hadn't found my place." The sheriff looked at Eleanor. "Miss Vance, what do you want to do?" "The law's murky here, but I'm inclined to side with you, given the circumstances." "I want nothing more to do with Mr. Blackwood," she said clearly. "I consider our business concluded." "You little—" Blackwood spurred his horse forward, but Liam was already moving. He grabbed the horse's bridle, using the animal's momentum to pull Blackwood off balance. "Touch her and I'll kill you," Liam said, his voice quiet but filled with deadly promise. Blackwood's face went purple with rage. "You dare threaten me?" "I own half this valley." "Not this half," Liam replied. "Now get off my land," the sheriff sighed. "Silas, I've heard enough." The lady's made her position clear. "You're lucky she's not pressing charges. I suggest you head home." "This isn't over," Blackwood snarled, yanking his horse around. He pointed a finger at Liam. "You think you can keep her, O'Connell?" "A worthless homesteader playing hero. She'll see what you really are soon enough. Nothing but dirt and sweat. And when she comes crawling to town begging for work, I'll be waiting." He spurred his horse viciously and rode off, his hired hand scrambling to follow. After they left, Eleanor sank onto the porch step, shaking. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I've brought trouble to your door." "Not your doing," Liam said firmly. "It was about time someone stood up to him." "What he said?" "About you." "Heard worse," Liam shrugged. "And there's truth in it." "I don't have much. This cabin, some cattle. Not what a lady like you deserves." "Stop," Eleanor said, turning to face him. "You're worth 10 of Silas Blackwood." 100. "Money doesn't make a man, Liam. Character does." "And you," she paused, a blush rising in her cheeks. "You have more character in your little finger than he has in his whole body." The shared danger had broken down the last wall between them. The air was thick with unspoken feelings. "He'll make trouble," Liam said finally. "Might be safer for you in town. Is that what you want?" she asked quietly. "For me to leave?" The question hung between them. Liam looked at her, at the strength beneath the fear, the grace that had survived so much. "No," he said, his voice rough. "I don't want you to leave. But I've got no right to ask you to stay. You deserve better than—" He gestured at the cabin, the land himself. "Better than a warm home and an honest man." She stepped closer. "Better than someone who sees me as a person, not property. Who risked Silas Blackwood's wrath to protect me? Tell me, Liam, where exactly would I find better than that?" He had no answer. He could only stand there, his heart hammering, as she reached up and gently touched his face. "I choose to stay," she said simply. "Not because I have nowhere else to go, but because this is where I want to be. With you, if you'll have me." "Eleanor." His voice broke on her name. "People will talk. Let them," she said fiercely. "I'm done living by other people's rules. The only opinion that matters to me is yours." He caught her hand, holding it against his cheek. "You know my opinion. Just been too much of a coward to say it." "Then say it now," she challenged, her green eyes bright with unshed tears. "I love you," he said, the words raw and true. "Lord help me. I think I've loved you since you stood on my doorstep looking like a half-drowned angel. I've got nothing to offer but hard work and uncertain seasons. But if you'll have me, Eleanor Vance, I'll spend my life trying to be the man you deserve." "You already are," she whispered, and rising up on her toes, she kissed him. It was a gentle kiss, full of new beginnings and promises. When they parted, he rested his forehead against hers. "We'll face whatever comes," he said. "Together." "Together," she agreed. From a distant hill, hidden among the pines, Silas Blackwood watched through field glasses, his face twisted with rage. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Word of the mail-order bride living at Liam O'Connell's cabin spread through Stone Creek like wildfire. Gossip became the town's favorite pastime. Some painted Eleanor as a fallen woman, others saw Liam as a thief who had stolen another man's bride. When Liam went to town for supplies, conversations would stop, only to resume in hushed whispers as he passed. But not everyone was against them. The local doctor and his kind wife Ellen paid them a visit, bringing a basket of preserves and offering their friendship. A neighboring rancher and his wife stopped by, declaring it was about time Liam found himself a sensible woman. Slowly, they began to find allies. Silas Blackwood, however, was not a man to accept defeat. His final gambit was as cruel as it was clever. A letter arrived for Eleanor, with a local postmark but unfamiliar handwriting. It claimed to be from a long-lost brother, stating that her father in Boston was gravely ill and begging her to return. A ticket, it said, was waiting for her at the bank, paid for by a charitable benefactor. "I don't have a brother," Eleanor said, her face pale. "My father died 2 years ago." "It's Blackwood," Liam said grimly. "He's trying to trick you into leaving. He wants to paint himself as a saint for helping you, and me as a villain for keeping you here." The plot came to a head in the middle of town. Blackwood was waiting at the bank with a local judge he had in his pocket. He publicly presented Eleanor with the news of her family's tragedy. When Eleanor declared the letter a forgery, Blackwood feigned shock, suggesting the isolation had affected her mind. He even produced a forged telegraph to back up his story. For a moment it seemed his lies would win. But then their allies stepped forward. The town reverend, who had once questioned their living arrangement, now spoke up, demanding proof of the telegraph's origin. The sheriff arrived, revealing he'd sent his own wire to Boston. The city records confirmed it. Eleanor Vance was an only child, and her parents had passed away years ago. The crowd murmured, turning against Blackwood. His deception was laid bare for all to see. "You left me to die in a blizzard," Eleanor said, her voice ringing with courage. "You've spread lies about my character. You've tried to trick me into leaving the man I love. Where is this generosity you speak of?" One by one, the good people of Stone Creek, the doctor's wife, the neighboring ranchers, even the general store owner, stepped forward. Siding with Eleanor and Liam, humiliated and exposed, Blackwood stormed off, his power over the town broken. That evening, back at the cabin, Eleanor turned to Liam. "I think I'd like to marry you sooner rather than later," she said. Not because of the gossips, but because I'm tired of wasting time. I want to be your wife in truth, not just in my heart. 2 weeks later, they were married under the large cottonwood tree beside the cabin. It was a simple ceremony attended by the friends who had stood by them. Eleanor wore a simple cream-colored dress, a gift from the doctor's wife, with wildflowers in her hair. Liam, his voice thick with emotion, slipped his own mother's wedding ring onto her finger. As the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, cheers erupted from their friends. It wasn't a society wedding, but it was a celebration of something far more valuable. A community choosing kindness over cruelty, and a love that had weathered the fiercest of storms. 5 years passed. The cabin grew, with a new room added for their 2 children, a bright-eyed girl named Emma and a toddling boy named James. The valley thrived, and Eleanor, once the subject of scandal, was now a respected community leader helping to organize the building of a new schoolhouse. One afternoon, a rider approached the homestead. It was Silas Blackwood. He looked older, defeated. He had lost his ranch and his fortune. He offered to buy their land, naming a price that would have once seemed like a king's ransom. Liam just shook his head. "Our home is not for sale." Eleanor stood beside him, their son clinging to her skirts. "I am thinking of my children," she told Blackwood. "This is their home. This is where they will learn what it means to work land your own hands have tended. No amount of money can buy that." Blackwood looked at the family before him, at the love, the strength, the simple, profound wealth they possessed. "You gave me everything," Eleanor said quietly. "By leaving me in that storm, you gave me the chance to find my real life. So, thank you, Mr. Blackwood. Thank you for showing me who you were before it was too late." Without another word, he turned his horse and rode away for the last time. That night, as the children slept soundly inside, Liam and Eleanor sat on their porch, watching the stars blanket the Wyoming sky. The cabin that had once sheltered a desperate woman from a blizzard now sheltered a family, built on a foundation of courage and love. The best things in life, they knew, often came disguised as disasters. A lonely man had opened his door to a stranger and found his soulmate. He had offered simple kindness and received a lifetime of love in return. If you enjoyed Liam and Eleanor's journey, please show your support by liking this video, leaving a comment, and subscribing for more tales of courage and love from the frontier. Check out our playlist for other stories you might love. Your support is what keeps these stories alive. Thank you for watching.